Very nice to see you again. I was so pleased when I heard that we were going to be doing this.
This is going to be a lot of fun, and yes, we will take questions. Allison's right. If you make a statement, we'll cut you off. So think about a question that you could ask Michael in about 40 minutes' time. You called this book Your Education, and I'm wondering whether I should be surprised, or we should be surprised, that Michael Pollan, Mr. Michael Pollan, food guru, never spent a lot of time cooking before you got involved.
Well, that's not quite accurate. I mean, I did cook. I just didn't do it with much thought, much deliberation, and much patience. We cooked probably more nights than we didn't. When I say we, I mean my wife Judith and my son Isaac. And but I just didn't take it very seriously. And you know, I perhaps did exaggerate a little bit about my naivete in the kitchen. Because the arc of the book is from a state of ignorance to a state of, knowledge is a strong word, but more knowledge. And I like to write that way. I really don't like writing as an expert, standing up and telling people what the deal is. I think it's a stance that journalists often take, and that turns people off. So I really like telling the story. The narrative we always have as journalists is the journey of our figuring something out. But we hardly ever recreate that on the page, and I think it's a very powerful thing.
You have a line at the beginning where you talk about how food, as you said, was a huge part of your identity, but it was almost more like furniture.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, it just was. As journalists, we're very drawn to taking people to exotic places. Peeling back the curtain and showing them what it's like inside a feedlot, or some food processing lab, or food science lab. And that's where, we love going to the places you're not supposed to go, or most people can't go. And so that's usually what I write about. And Omnivore's Dilemma was about taking people behind the scenes of the food system. Or we write about science, and we take people into nutrition science or something like that. But cooking is, it's right there, it's right in front of us. And it took me a while to realize, yes, it's right in front of us, but we don't really see it. And sometimes, the best kind of stories are about the most ordinary things.
Was there a moment in which you realized that you needed to kind of go a little bit deeper into that world, that it could be just furniture?
Yes. When I was, over the course of this whole journey I've been on for 10 years, writing about the food chain, from the earth to the body, I wrote Omnivore's Dilemma, which is very much about farming, In Defense of Food. Food rules very much about our bodies and what food does to them. And I kept getting clues that the most important link or the most influential link might be this one in the middle, where we transform the stuff coming off of farms into meals. And that, because as I looked at the history of industrial agriculture, what drove it was the industrialization of our eating. So it's when McDonald's, becomes the biggest buyer of potatoes in America, which they are. I think they buy somewhere between 7 and 10% of the entire crop. That we suddenly only grow russet Burbanks, and in monoculture, and they all have to be grown the same way, which requires huge amounts of pesticides to make them look identical and all this kind of thing, because they want that, that same experience all over the world. The red box with a little bouquet of very long French fries, and only the russet Burbank gives you that length on the French fry. And so it's our eating and how we're choosing to prepare our food and who's preparing it that's determining the kind of agriculture we have. So that was one clue. And then on the other side, as I studied nutrition science, and I delved into learning about nutrients, and we were talking about this last time I was here, and really realizing that nutrients don't explain that much, even though that's what we obsess about, and calories, that the most important thing about a healthy diet, or the most telling thing, was who is cooking it. Was it being cooked by a human being, or was it being cooked by a corporation? And if it's being cooked by a corporation, the chances are that it's got way too many calories, not enough fiber, all the things that we know is wrong with food gets us into trouble. So between those two things, I was like, this is the missing link in the food chain, and it deserves a book of its own. And so that's kind of what got me into it. And then it just became all fun. Compared to the other reporting I've done, you call up a baker and say you want to hang out and learn how to bake bread, a lot easier than calling Monsanto and trying to get in and get it quote and all that kind of stuff. I mean, so this actually was the most fun I've ever had, ostensibly working as a journalist.
How did you figure out what 4 elements you wanted to look at? I mean, you could have structured it in a way that went through a range of different kinds of people, different kinds of experience and interpretation. How do you decide that these are the things, not just fire, water, and air, but also the 4 styles of cooking, things that you actually want to cook?
Well, in a way, the really hard part of the book is determining the structure. And for me, breaking it down into 3, 4, or 5 parts. I'm drawn to 4-part books. Almost all my books are 4 parts. In Defense of Food is 3 parts. I don't know, it's a shorter book, it's more polemical. Polemics are kind of 3 parts. I don't know why. It's just a belief I have. So the first thing I started doing whenever I decided to write about something is like, okay, what are the fundamentals? What's the common denominator? What can I boil this down to? I mean, I really like getting down to essentials on anything I'm writing about. And I started saying, well, fire, obviously, that's a kind of cooking, and water is the other kind of cooking, and then there was 2, and then I realized, well, but what about fermentation? And then baking. So I had fire, water, and I told my wife this, and I remember taking this hike with her in Marin County, and I'm laying this out, and I was struggling, and she said, well, it sounds like the classical elements. And I started playing it out, and I said, I guess, yeah, earth could be, cooking with microbes, fermentation, because the earth is very microbial, and the first ferments were cold, dug in the ground, and I said, air, how is air baking? And I'm like, air is baking, of course, it's putting air into porridge. It's and in fact, a good loaf of bread is 80% air. So it was serendipitous. I mean, my wife is a great editor, and she reads all my stuff before it leaves the house, and she's many times made great suggestions, but this was a really key one. And then when I had that structure, and if you really push on it, I'm sure you can come up with kinds of cooking that don't fit into one of those 4 categories. Like, I don't know where I put sushi. Now, you might dispute it's not cooking, but it certainly is food that's been changed by human action. So there's a couple that don't really fit very well, but it captures a lot in many different cultures.
The barbecue thing is fascinating. In part, it's structured around the idea of cooking hypothesis.
Yeah.
For people who aren't familiar with that, talk a little bit.
Sure. Well, fire, the first section is about the oldest kind of cooking we know. And so just how old is it? Well, it's really old.
It's actually a great story with the invention part.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, we should get to that to remind me if I forget. But anyway, so when does cooking begin? According to Richard Wrangham, who's a Harvard primatologist and anthropologist, he put forward a couple years ago in an article and then a book, something called the cooking hypothesis. And anthropologists have been trying to figure out for a long time where we diverged from the other apes. At a certain moment, our brain got a lot bigger than theirs for the body size, for the size we were. And our guts got a lot smaller, our digestive system. And our jaws got a lot smaller. And we became more like who we are. But why? And what drove that? And his hypothesis is very interesting. He said it was the access to cooked food and the discovery of how to cook. Because when you cook food, you're essentially externalizing part of the digestive process. Some of the breakdown of the food is happening before you take it in. And cooked food is also, it detoxifies certain foods, it sanitizes certain foods, and it makes them much easier to digest. So all the metabolic energy that's going on to break down raw food, we no longer have to expend, which leaves more energy for these brains. And so it is the access to cooked food that underwrites the incredible expansion of the human brain, which is a great energy driver. It uses 20% of your energy, and it's only 2 to 3% of your body weight. So you need a lot of energy to support it, and only cooked food gives it to you. So for those of you on an all raw food diet, I have some concerns. In fact, people on raw food diets, according to Wrangham, generally, well, women on raw food diets half of them stop menstruating, suggesting that they're not getting enough energy. And if not for the Vitamix or other kinds of blenders, it would be very hard to live on a raw food diet at all, because you would have to spend as much time in the act of chewing as apes our size do. Which, no, this is not trivial. Apes our size spend half of their waking hours chewing. That's why they don't get much done.